Hello and welcome to this screencast on the cardiovascular system during exercise of differing intensities and during recovery as well. So first of all, the big picture cardiovascular system. We've looked at the structure and function, the conduction system, cardiac cycle, relationship and changes to heart rate, stroke volume, and cardiac output during physical activity. We're now looking at regulation of heart rate during physical activity and recovery as well. So first of all, the specification, that's what we've looked at, the effects of differing exercise intensities and recovery on heart rate, stroke volume, cardiac output, and methods of calculating the above. And we're going to come down to the bottom now and look at regulation of heart rate during exercise, specifically focus on neural control, hormonal, and intrinsic. So, exam questions may look like this. Have a look at them, 4 marks each, neural control, hormonal control. Okay, so moving on. Key terms that we need to be aware of. First of all, this thing called the cardiac control center. This is located in the medulla oblongata of the brain and it's responsible for regulating our heart rate. The medulla oblongata of the brain is here. Okay, so in here we've got something called the cardiac control center and this is what is responsible for regulating our heart rate, i.e. increasing it or decreasing it. So, the sympathetic nervous system, what is it? The sympathetic nervous system, we need to know how it does what it does and then how as well. So what, how. The what is it's stimulated to increase our heart rate. Sympathetic nervous system increases our heart rate. Fight or flight, you might have heard of that. That is the sympathetic nervous system, okay? How does it increase our heart rate? It increases it by increasing the firing rate of the SA node, which is located in the right atrial walls, remember. And then finally, it stimulates to increase heart rate by increasing the firing rate of the SA node. But how does it do this? It does this via the accelerator nerve. It's symbolised in this red one here. So we have got a nerve coming all the way down to the SA node that stimulates our heart rate to increase. As well as sympathetic nervous system, we've also got the parasympathetic nervous system. Now the parasympathetic nervous system, what, how, this is stimulated to decrease our heart rate. It does this by decreasing the firing rate of the SA node and via a nerve called the vagus nerve, which is symbolised in blue. So once we have stopped exercising, once we are in recovery, our heart rate decreases. This is because the parasympathetic nervous system takes over, decreases the firing rate of the SA node via the vagus nerve, which is this blue one here. Okay, so regulation of heart rate, looking at hormonal control. So hormonal control, what are we referring to here? We are referring to the hormone adrenaline. Okay, so what happens is adrenaline is secreted by the adrenal glands. This stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, which increases the firing rate of the SA node, therefore increasing our heart rate, our stroke volume and our cardiac output. What you could put is adrenaline secreted by the adrenal glands. This sends a message to the cardiac control center located in the medulla oblongata of the brain, controlled by the autonomic nervous system, stimulating the sympathetic nervous system via the accelerator nerve, increasing the firing rate of the SA node to increase heart rate, stroke volume and cardiac output. So if we look at our submaximal exercise graph here, the hormonal control is the anticipatory rise, so it's this part here. So as we are standing on the start of a 100 meters or start of a marathon, adrenaline is secreted. This stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, increasing the firing rate of the SA node, which is increasing our heart rate, our stroke volume and our cardiac output. So this hormonal control is this anticipatory rise here. So that's hormonal control. Please have questions on that in corner note form and information regarding hormonal control. So it's all to do with adrenaline. Okay, we also have neural control during exercise. Okay, so symbolised here, stationary, we start to exercise. When we think of neural control, we must think of receptors. Neural control equals receptors. So what happens? First of all, we have got chemoreceptors. Chemoreceptors detect an increase in carbon dioxide and a decrease in oxygen when we start to exercise. We start to run. There's an increase in carbon dioxide in the muscle and a decrease in oxygen. Chemoreceptors are found in our muscles, okay. We have proprioceptors. These located in our muscles as well, our tendons and our joints, and these detect an increase in movement. So as you start to move more, proprioceptors detect this. And then finally we have baroreceptors. Baroreceptors located in the blood vessel walls detect an increase in blood pressure. So all three of these receptors inform the cardiac control center, which is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Because we are exercising, right, what happens is all of these three receptors tell the cardiac control center we need more blood, we need more oxygen. Therefore, the sympathetic nervous system is stimulated via the accelerator nerve, increasing the firing rate of the SA node here, which is increasing our heart rate, our stroke volume, and our cardiac output. So that is neural control during exercise. Now you may get asked neural control during recovery. Okay, first of all, neural control during exercise, it's when we start to move. So it's this steep incline here. Okay, so this is when we start to get neural control. We start to move, exercise. Chemoreceptors, proprioceptors, baroreceptors detect all these changes, send a message to the cardiac control center, stimulate the sympathetic nervous system via the accelerator nerve, increasing the firing rate of the SA node. That's what happens here. So during recovery, okay, it's slightly different. We still get neural control receptors, and the only difference is we've gone from running to being stationary. We reverse it, okay? So chemoreceptors detect a decrease in carbon dioxide and an increase in oxygen. Proprioceptors detect a decrease in movement. Baroreceptors detect a decrease in blood pressure. All these three inform the cardiac control center, controlled by the autonomic nervous system, and stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system via the vagus nerve to decrease the firing rate of the SA node, therefore decreasing heart rate, stroke volume, and cardiac output. Don't necessarily need notes on this one, need it on the first one during exercise. However, if you know during exercise, you'll be able to flip it and do recovery, because the same applies, just reversed. So that is neural control. So we've had hormonal control and we've looked at neural control. Now we're going to look at intrinsic control. Just before we do, on the graph here, this rapid decrease here, or steep decline here, this is during recovery, because exercise is finished, we're recovering. This is why our heart rate drops, because the three receptors detect the changes, inform the CCC that stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system via the vagus nerve, decreasing our heart rate. Okay, so last one, intrinsic control during exercise. We have to think intrinsic, think vintrinsic. V and the T, specifically the V and the T are very important because these two things are what change with intrinsic control during exercise. First of all, intrinsic control equals vintrinsic. We have got an increased temperature. That's what the T stands for. So there's an increased temperature during exercise. What this does is this increases the speed of nerve transmission, which increases the firing rate of the SA node, increasing heart rate, stroke volume, and cardiac output. So the impulses being sent to the heart are much quicker because the increased temperature increases the speed of nerve transmission. So that's the T of vintrinsic. The other side we need to know is venous return, so increased venous return. So during exercise we get an increase in venous return. Now what venous return is the amount of blood returning back to the heart. So we are getting more blood going back to the heart during exercise. Now you've got to think of it like this, more blood going back to the heart, we're going to get more blood leaving the heart, therefore straight away we're going to get an increase in stroke volume and cardiac output, aren't we? However, we also get an increase in heart rate, and this is how. More blood returned back to the right atrium. So what happens is the right atrial walls stretch, right, and this stretch increases the firing rate of the SA node and therefore increases heart rate, because the SA node is firing faster. So we get an increase in heart rate. Now, because we're getting more blood back to the right atrium, it means more blood is being forced into the ventricles. So because more blood is being forced into the ventricles, this increases ventricular stretch. So our ventricles stretch further, which means we have an increased force of contraction, which ultimately means we're getting more blood leave the heart, so we get an increase in stroke volume and an increase in cardiac output. Please add to the end of this that this is known as Starling's law. This increase in ventricular stretch, therefore an increased force of contraction, which increases stroke volume and cardiac output, is known as Starling's law. So quite a lot of information to get there, but please make sure you have corner notes for hormonal control, neural control, and intrinsic control during exercise. When we come into lesson, we might be having a go at this at some point after going through it with you. Okay, thank you for listening.